For anyone with any real fabrication skills, modifying a Power Wheels is an exercise in restraint. The internet is full of builds that quickly turn into fits of vicarious excess that end up with a toy that's neither fun nor safe for the kids, nor does it add to their skills in any meaningful way. But for anyone willing to take a few minutes to understand how they work, Power Wheels are actually free. The toys are extremely simple, and the only expensive part is the actual battery itself, and that's only because all the electrical safety is built into it. You see them all the time in the sub $20 price range, and since my son's now big enough to ride them, I've collected half a dozen or so without spending the first dime. The biggest problem with the things is the short run time, and if you sort that out with a second or aftermarket battery, they quickly lose their novelty, and then the kids just abuse them to death from boredom. Even if they're treated well, the batteries eventually stop taking a charge, or the kids simply outgrow them, and then they just sit around until they deteriorate to the point of worthlessness, and then folks just throw them out. But they're awesome for kids of a certain age range, since the low power and speed, combined with the low traction tires, let the kids learn the basics of aiming a vehicle without giving them enough power to be dangerous. The boy found my stash of broken Power Wheels in the woods and was immediately infatuated with this dune buggy style thing. He's been dragging it around the yard for a few weeks now, making all kinds of suggestions about what it could be. It's in the worst shape by far, and it's sunburnt to a crisp. But after checking that the motors were still good, I had a moment of weakness and suggested that we could maybe get it running, and he hasn't stopped talking about it since. And it's amazing what a 4-year-old can talk you into. Since the steering is missing and the driver is centered with his head almost directly over the rear axle, I had the idea of making it into a skid steer with lever controls like a zero-turn mower. The added novelty should hold his attention for a few minutes at least, and maybe even teach him a completely new driving concept. After an exhaustive 2 or 3 minute web search, I found that this model was produced between 98 and 2001, and the corporate branding suggests that this guy in particular was probably made in the year 2000, but it looks way older than 20. The whole thing is loose and wobbly, and I've seen clapped out pontoon boats with less sun damage. I found it in a pile of demolition debris in a bad part of town, and I only picked it up because it had a couple of half-decent looking back wheels. Fisher-Price has made a joystick-controlled model for a few years, but they're still too new to be in my price range. Because of the rough shape that the thing's in, and I wasn't even sure that it would be controllable, I decided that a proof of concept was in order before I go all in and building it. I started by gathering the basic parts that I needed. The lockdown has presented me with an opportunity to limit the amount of money that I spend on superfluous projects like this, since I have to wait more than 2 days for any parts, and I decided that I wouldn't spend a single dime on it, or even leave my property for supplies. I'd only use parts that were destined for the garbage or that I'd had for at least a couple of years. This was a personal challenge, and you'll just have to trust me. We pulled off the seat, removed the trashed wiring, and made sure that the pedal switch was still good, since it was the only part of the original electrical system that we were reusing. I decided against doing any kind of variable speed control, since the overall condition of the toy doesn't warrant much time investment, and I wasn't sure that the boy would understand how to operate it. A simple forward neutral reverse switch setup was all I could fit into the budget, and I'll start with a dead man pedal that he'll need to hold down in order to enable the motors. The go pedal is a familiar enough concept to him, and I'll add more safety measures as I identify any kind of dangers. I found a couple of 25 amp 3-pole triple throw toggle switches and made room in an old telephone splitter box. I've had these switches so long that I don't really remember where I got them. They seem to be reversing switches for a 3-phase motor, which means that I've had them since the heyday of eBay around 2004-2005. All the wiring came from a wall oven that I'd salvaged for heating elements years ago, and it's 150C rated siliconized wire, which is a little overkill. Electricity is kind of my thing, so I went ahead and made a proper wiring harness that I could reuse on any of these toys if this thing failed. The wiring for the switches themselves is pretty basic, and it's just 2 copies of the forward and reverse switch on the standard toys. With these simple switch controls, the car won't have a high and a low speed. There's a second switch in the original shifter that changes the motors from series to parallel, and when they're in series, the battery voltage is just divided between the motors, and that's not possible with this setup. Hopefully it isn't so fast that it's dangerous when he has the motors running in opposite directions to spin the car, otherwise I'll just have to reduce the pack voltage to a safe point with a lower top speed. I mounted the control box between his knees and ran the power to the motors and pedal switch. I connected one of the 7.2 volt 30 amp hour Prius batteries that I've been using to power his other ride-on toys just to make sure that I'd wired everything correctly. I threw some big zip ties on the battery for the test and gave him a shot at it to make sure that the gearboxes wouldn't immediately self-destruct.
Okay. You can give it a try. Forward, push them both forward. There we go. Alright, now if you want to go... The light turns like that.
This is a good toy. I find it cool.
Having passed the sanity test, I found a piece of steel tubing in my scrap pile that had some wheel casters already welded to it. It was just leftovers from something that I'd thrown together to move a non-rolling chassis when I moved into this house. I chopped it in half and attached it to the plastic frame with some 2-inch self-drilling screws. I happened to have a good tire and wheel, so it went on for the test.
It's basically a big steel battering ram, and if you drive it in a place that you're not supposed to drive it, the whole thing's going to come apart, all right? Don't go anywhere but this concrete pad. Nowhere but the concrete pad. Don't go off of it, because if you jam that wheel up and it punches through there, it's going to hit you right in the crotch. It's not going to be like one of these videos crotch hit. It's going to be like a let's go to the hospital kind of crotch hit, okay? You can put these switches any way you want, okay? Put them whatever combination you want. It's going to make it do different things. If you let go of that foot switch, it'll stop, okay? You drive around a little bit. You gotta put the switches somewhere if they're in the middle.
Why do this? What does that mean?
That means the right side goes forward. Now use both hands on the switches. Both hands on them. Alright, now one hand's for going one way and one hand's for going the other way. Now switch them the other direction.
What?
Now switch the switches the other direction. One all the way forward and one all the way backward. Yep, it's all the way backward already. Now push the other one. Yep, there you go. Now switch them again. Okay, so that worked, and honestly, I was more worried that he wouldn't, understand, or maybe it would go too fast and it would flick around too quick. But with that 8-volt battery in there, it looked like it was going to work just fine. So the main problem being that the thing doesn't really have a whole lot of weight to it, and caster wheels are kind of funny about how they. The more caster that you put on that thing, the axis of rotation is perfectly perpendicular to the ground, and the more of that caster that you put on those, the less stable that the thing becomes. Because that wheel will go way off center, and if you have this like on a toolbox or something, the edge of the toolbox is way out here. You're moving that wheel inboard, and your center of gravity is. Goes up, and the higher your center of gravity is on a toolbox or something, the less stable it is. So honestly, it needs 2 casters. It needs 2 casters, and they need to be. Because I could like cut that and bend it or whatever, but this was just kind of like a proof of concept. I think it's worth at least putting a little bit more time into just to, give them some other fun little thing to get sick and dizzy on. So we'll knock that off. This Cozy Coup's, the only action this Cozy Coupe has seen probably in the last 1.5 to 2 years is, we put a rope on it and he pulls it around with the other one, and that's it. And these things people give them away all the time, they're free. So anyway, I'm going to swipe the casters off of this one. They're, sort of designed for the task, and that doesn't take much, effort to get them to swivel around. The only goofy thing about these is that, the axle, it seems like this part should be inboard, but it's not, just, to clear his feet. And this one, this Cozy Coupe's been run over a couple times, it's been rode hard and put away wet. So anyway, I'm just going to, snatch the parts off of this. The only really important measurement there is to the bottom of that, from the top of the wheel to the bottom of the swivel, and it's right at 8.25 inches to that, where the thing sort of pins in there. This shaft measures, it's like 375, so that's 3/8 of an inch. So I'll find a piece of tubing with that 3/8 of an inch. And this is pretty, like one of the only pieces of metal in this whole machine is this thing that sort of goes from one side to the other, and it was sort of flopping around in there. There's where it mounts to the bottom of this thing, it's using big long screws and no spacer, so and this shouldn't take very long, and I'm going to try to get it done pretty quick before. If he spends too much time watching me weld, he always complains about his eyeballs hurting and stuff, so we'll just save me the trouble of having to listen to him. So
Drilling out the holes in the original steering brace to accept a couple of pieces of 10 by 12 millimeter tube gave me the proper wheelbase without even measuring. I also cut out some plastic to get the brace higher into the body for stability. I had intended to brace the tops of the swivel tubes together and run some struts back to the body, but that would have made it impossible to remove the assembly if I welded it into place. So I drilled out the original steering tie rod and welded some bolts to the tubes so it would be removable. The assembly was already more rigid than the plastic body that it would attach to, so I just welded on some tabs to bolt it down. While the paint dried, I removed the wheels to clean the rust off of the axle and grease it up. I cut out a place to mount a battery box and bolted it in. And then just a little final assembly before I went ahead and gave him a go.
There, but I have to close the door.
Get in, close the door. Okay. Well, first you got to put the switches to where you want to go. Let's stop. Put one switch backward and one switch forward. Okay. Now hold on. Wait. All right. So now put both switches backwards. Okay. What? Well, you know what? You're just going to have to figure it out. Keep going. Did I not tell you to put this where it goes? I did. I told you where to put this shovel and you didn't put it where I told you. So it's another time you're not listening to me. You're going to have to back up and hit it real hard if you're going to go up that thing.
I'm on back up.
You ran me over. More to run up. Okay, there you go. Now hit it. Now back up and then get going. And then once you're going, look at this. Once you're going, if you want to go this way, put this one in the middle. And while you're going. But don't stop to do it. Just keep going and then put this one in the middle when you're going and you'll go that way. And then whenever you're pointing the way that you want to... Yep, and then whenever you're pointing the way, look at me, look down. You're getting sidetracked. Just get going. But that only works when you're already going. Go. Good job. Just like that. Good job. Keep going. Keep going. Don't stop when you're getting stuck. See, when you let go of your foot, you lose your momentum. And when you lose your momentum, then you can't get up over top of stuff. Getting going from a stop, you're using all your power to get going, and instead of using your power to get over top of things. You're fine. Just learn. Just do all the driving with your fingers. Quick update here. The 8-volt battery, it worked, but it wasn't really enough. So I went ahead and converted this thing to those 18650 cells. It's 12 volts. Also, he was complaining that the levers were too short, and so this is about the best thing I could come up with as far as how to extend them. That's just a piece of a hose with a cane foot, something like that. Also, it was kind of tracking funny to one side, so I went ahead and poked some holes in there and shush. You haven't barked in 3 days, and y'all barking when I'm trying to. So I put some grease in these motor housings are just, they are sunburnt. Like I was sure that they wouldn't last very long, but boy, you can scratch about half of that thickness off of there. It wasn't skidding very well, but the weight of the battery actually helped that out quite a bit. But I stuck some screws in there. They don't really touch when he's on the concrete. They only touch whenever he's in the dirt. So whenever he gets off into the pine straw, it kind of grips a little bit and helps him pull forward. But I thought about finding another one of these levers. I think the hot setup right here would be to use this lever housing and just figure out how to stick another one over there on that other side, because this part, the switch housing itself, is the same on all of this brand of a toy. The other thing is that the pedal switch, I was convinced that thing, because the wires on the original wire harness were rotted off of it. I mean, it was sitting in water for God knows how long, but it did finally quit, and I just put like a metal starter switch on it. So, but I found that big box of those push nuts that I had, so I stuck new push nuts on there. He calls it his lever wheel. If we took the wheel off of it, wouldn't it be a power lever? But no, he wants to call it a lever wheel. He demands that I do the same.
Now, you're probably thinking I'm sort of cheating here with a $1,200 aircraft-grade lithium battery, but these things are basically free to me, and the time that it's going to spend in this toy isn't going to hurt it at all.
That was fun. They're driving by this.
The motor housings have held up for a few more days, so I decided to fix some things. The roll cage was loose and floppy, so I replaced all the missing screws, tightened the rest, and superglued the bars together at the seams. I scrubbed away some of the oxidation and gave it a coat of plastic adhesion promoter. The only other color of spray paint that I had on hand was gloss black, which was rejected by committee, so I gave it a coat of clear instead. It doesn't look too bad and kind of resembles purple camouflage. I found a can of safety yellow oil-based paint of an unknown vintage, so I gave the roll cage and all of the other yellow bits a quick refresh. It probably looks good to passing traffic, and I bet it'll dry eventually. Some wire loom for safety, and another quick refresh of the decal stickers, and the temporary transformation from garbage to self-propelled garbage is now complete. And here it is. We started with a plan to sacrifice a couple of Beyond Dead ride-on toys for some quick laughs, but we've ended up with a toy that's an absolute blast. It's unbelievably maneuverable and he can drive it like a pro. It's also turned out to be safe and stable pretty much anywhere on our farm that it'll get traction. I only wish that the thing was in better shape to start with, since it's become one of his favorite toys. The battery lasts for several days on a charge, and I've actually caught him falling asleep while driving it. The best thing is that it didn't cost a dime to build. And since I didn't allow myself to go overboard, it didn't take very long to build either. Maybe 5 or 6 hours total, probably half of that paint. We have a ton of other projects in the works, so don't forget to like and subscribe. And support the Project House on Patreon.